From protector to captive. The Queen's daughter refused to let him leave. Captain John Harper had always considered himself a soldier first and foremost. His loyalty to his people was unwavering, and his dedication to protecting those under his charge was absolute. But when he was sent to a distant planet on a mission to guard the Queen's daughter, Princess Lyra, he quickly realized that this would be unlike any mission he had ever undertaken. The planet, named Zenthar, was in the midst of a civil war. Factions vied for control, and the safety of the royal family was always at risk. Princess Lyra, the daughter of Queen Verena, had become a symbol of hope for the people of Zenthar. Her intelligence and diplomatic skills had earned her the respect of many, and her role in the peace talks between the warring factions was crucial. However, there were those who wished to see her dead. Rival factions believed that killing the princess would destroy any chance of peace and shift the balance of power in their favor. Captain Harper was part of a small elite squad assigned to protect her. They were to ensure that Lyra could travel to various negotiation points without harm. The squad was led by Captain Harper himself, a seasoned officer known for his strategic mind and combat prowess. His team had been through many dangerous missions, but nothing compared to the stakes of this one. The princess's life wasn't just important to the future of Zenthar, it was the key to maintaining peace throughout the entire galaxy. Harper's first impression of Princess Lyra was not what he expected. Despite her royal title, she was not a fragile, delicate figure wrapped in luxury. Lyra was strong-willed, sharp-minded, and determined to see her people thrive. She was a strategist in her own right, and Harper quickly realized that she didn't need a bodyguard to fight her battles. But the threat was real, and Harper's job was clear: keep her safe no matter the cost. Their first mission together took them through a dangerous region of the planet, known for its treacherous terrain and heavy factional presence. Lyra was to attend a diplomatic summit in a nearby city, and Harper's team was tasked with ensuring she arrived without incident. But as the convoy made its way through the wilderness, it became clear that someone had tipped off the enemy. The ambush came swiftly. As the convoy made its way along a narrow mountain pass, the sound of gunfire echoed through the canyon. Harper instinctively moved to protect Lyra, pulling her down into the cover of a nearby boulder as shots rang out all around them. His team quickly sprang into action, returning fire to fend off the attackers, but Harper's focus remained solely on the princess. "You're not going anywhere, Your Highness," Harper said, pulling her further into cover. The gunfire was relentless, but the soldiers' training kicked in, and they managed to push the enemy back. It was clear, however, that this was just the beginning. Whoever was targeting Lyra was not going to stop until they succeeded. Lyra, though shaken, remained calm. Harper could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't just the Queen's daughter, she was a leader in her own right. She had no intention of running away, and she made it clear that she wasn't going to be intimidated by her enemies. "Get me to the summit," Lyra ordered firmly, her voice unwavering. "We can't let them stop us now." Harper was about to protest, but he saw the fire in her eyes. She had made up her mind. It wasn't just about diplomacy for her, it was about proving that she could lead her people even in the face of danger. Harper nodded, silently acknowledging her resolve. His job was to protect her, and that meant making sure she got to the summit, no matter what. The rest of the journey was tense, with constant threats of ambushes and skirmishes. Despite the danger, Lyra insisted on continuing with the mission. She wasn't just a princess, she was a symbol of hope, and she refused to be pushed aside. Harper admired her determination, even as he wished she would let him do his job without so much resistance. As they reached the summit, a sense of relief washed over Harper. They had made it through the hardest part, but as the diplomatic talks began, something unexpected happened. Lyra pulled Harper aside, away from the other diplomats and officials. "I need you to stay with me," she said, her voice low. "Not just as a protector, but as a confidant." Harper looked at her, confused. "Your Highness, I'm just a soldier. I'm here to protect you, not—" "No," Lyra interrupted, her eyes locking onto his. "You're more than just a soldier. You're the only one I trust. You see the world through a different lens. I need your perspective. We can't win this war with only politics. I need someone who understands the bigger picture." Harper hesitated. He had been trained to protect and serve, not to get involved in the delicate political webs of royalty. But there was something about Lyra that drew him in. She wasn't like the other royals he had served. She wasn't interested in playing games, she was determined to change the future of her people. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Harper wanted to help her. "I'll stay," Harper said, his voice softening. "But you have to promise me one thing, stay safe." "Your life is too important." Lyra smiled, her gaze steady. "I promise, Captain, but remember, I'm not the one who needs protecting anymore. We're in this together." The moment of calm didn't last long. Within hours of the diplomatic meeting, the summit was attacked again. This time, it was a full assault by a faction known for their brutality. Harper and his team fought valiantly to hold them off, but it was clear that they were outnumbered. Lyra, despite the chaos, remained resolute, helping to organize the defense alongside Harper. As the battle raged on, the situation grew more dire. Harper realized that there was no longer any doubt. His mission had become far more complicated than he ever could have imagined. He wasn't just protecting the princess anymore. He was now a part of her struggle for her people's future. With the summit destroyed and their enemies closing in, Lyra made a shocking decision. She refused to leave the planet. Her mother, the queen, had ordered her return to the capital for safety, but Lyra wouldn't go. She had seen the corruption within her mother's reign, and she knew that running away would mean giving up on everything she had fought for. "I won't leave," she said, her voice firm. "We're not running anymore. I need to stay here and fight for my people." Harper was stunned. His first instinct was to argue, to tell her that this wasn't safe. But he saw the fire in her eyes again, the same fire that had kept her going through every obstacle. She wasn't going to back down. "Then I'm staying with you," Harper said, his voice filled with resolve. "We'll face this together." As the first part of their journey came to an end, Harper realized that he was no longer just her protector. He was caught in a struggle far greater than anything he had anticipated. And as he looked at Lyra, standing tall and resolute, he knew that his life would never be the same again. Captain John Harper stood at the edge of the royal palace balcony, looking out over the horizon. The sprawling city of Zenthar sprawled beneath him, and beyond that, the dark forests and treacherous mountains that marked the borders of the planet. The sound of his boots tapping against the stone floor was the only noise that filled the silence. The battle had ended hours ago, but the tension still hung in the air like a thick fog. Lyra, the princess, had refused to leave the palace, and Captain Harper was forced to respect her decision. She insisted on staying in the heart of the conflict, despite her mother's orders for her safety. There was something in her eyes when she made that decision, something more than just rebellion. It was determination. She wasn't simply defying her mother, she was rejecting the life that had been forced upon her. Harper couldn't help but admire her strength, even though it worried him. For the first time in a long while, Harper found himself questioning his role. He was supposed to protect the princess, but how could he protect her when she wouldn't let him? He had been trained to follow orders, to be loyal to his superiors, and yet here he was, standing beside a woman who wasn't afraid to challenge everything she had been born into. He turned as he heard footsteps behind him. Lyra stood there, her silhouette framed by the soft light of the evening sun. She was dressed in simple clothes, not the royal gowns she often wore. This was who she truly was, a woman of the people, not a princess confined to palaces and political games. "Captain," she said, her voice steady but tired, "you don't have to stay, I can do this myself." Harper shook his head. "No, Your Highness, I'm staying." "You're not alone in this." She smiled softly but didn't argue further. For the first time since he'd met her, Harper felt like she truly understood him. She wasn't asking for his protection out of weakness. She wasn't relying on him because she couldn't handle things on her own. She needed him because, just like her, he wanted to see a better future for the people of Zenthar. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts, as the sun began to set. The city below them was still and quiet, but Harper knew that it wouldn't stay that way for long. The forces that opposed Lyra's rule were not done. They would keep coming, and soon the entire galaxy would be drawn into the struggle. Lyra broke the silence first. "I don't trust my mother anymore," she said quietly, her eyes distant. "She's hiding something. I've always been her heir, always been the perfect princess. But now I know there's more to this war than just politics." Harper turned to face her. "What do you mean?" Lyra looked him in the eye, her expression fierce. "The factions that want me dead. They don't just want power, they want control of something much bigger, something my mother has been keeping from me my entire life." Harper's brow furrowed. "What could that be?" Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper, as though afraid someone might overhear. Ancient technology. It's been hidden for centuries, and my mother has been using it to keep her hold on power. I think the factions want it, and they're willing to do anything to get it." Harper's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a political struggle, it was a fight for control of something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. If the factions got their hands on this technology, everything would change. The war wouldn't just be about Zenthar anymore. It would be a galaxy-wide conflict, one that could tear the entire universe apart. "I can't let that happen," Lyra said, as if reading his thoughts. "I need to stop it, and I need your help." Harper nodded. "You have it. I've always been loyal to my people. If this technology can end the war, we'll do whatever it takes to protect it." Lyra's eyes softened, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to relax. "Thank you, Captain. You're not just my protector anymore. You're my ally." The words hung in the air between them, and Harper knew that everything was about to change. His mission had always been simple: keep the princess safe. But now, that mission had expanded into something far more complicated. He wasn't just protecting her. He was helping her fight for the future of her people. The next few days were a blur of preparation and planning. Harper and Lyra worked together, learning everything they could about the ancient technology the princess had discovered. She had hidden away every bit of information she could find, scouring old archives and speaking with trusted allies. But it wasn't enough. They needed more. Harper knew they couldn't do this alone. They had to gather allies, find the pieces of the puzzle before it was too late. And so they set out to form alliances with the other factions, those who had previously been neutral in the war. But as they moved forward, they encountered more resistance than they had expected. Not everyone was eager to join their cause. Some feared the technology that Lyra spoke of, while others were too afraid of the Queen's wrath to make a stand. Harper and Lyra faced rejection at every turn, but neither of them gave up. They knew that without the support of these factions, their efforts would be in vain. They had to convince these leaders that this fight wasn't just about power. It was about saving everything they held dear. As they traveled from city to city, Harper watched Lyra carefully. She was not the same woman he had first met. She was becoming a leader in her own right, someone who commanded respect and loyalty from everyone around her. Her determination was contagious, and soon Harper found himself believing in the cause as much as she did. But with each new day, the danger grew. The Queen's forces were closing in, and Harper could feel the pressure mounting. They were running out of time, and Lyra's confidence, while admirable, began to feel like a double-edged sword. She had no intention of turning back now. She was willing to risk everything for this cause, even if it meant going up against her own mother. One night, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, Harper found Lyra sitting alone in the garden. The moonlight cast a soft glow over her face, and for a moment she looked like a woman caught between two worlds, the world she was born into and the world she was trying to create. "Your Highness," Harper said softly, walking over to her. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "You don't have to stay here, Captain. You're free to go." Harper shook his head. "No, I'm not leaving you, not now, not ever." Lyra smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Then I'm glad you're with me. You're more than just my protector now, Harper. You're part of my future." The weight of her words settled heavily in the air, and Harper knew that there was no going back. He wasn't just fighting to protect her anymore. He was fighting for a future where people like her, people who had the strength to change the world, could lead without fear. And as the days stretched on and the conflict escalated, Harper and Lyra found themselves becoming more than just allies. They were becoming a team, and together they would face whatever came next. Because now they weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a better tomorrow. Captain John Harper had never imagined that his life would come to this. When he first stepped foot on Zenthar, his mission had been simple: protect Princess Lyra, keep her safe from the chaos that surrounded her. But now, things were far more complicated. The fate of an entire galaxy seemed to rest in their hands, and every decision they made carried the weight of that responsibility. Harper had always been a man of action. His orders were clear, and he followed them without question. But Lyra had changed that. She wasn't just another royal to protect. She was someone who believed in a cause, someone who had a vision for the future. And as much as Harper tried to stay distant, he found himself drawn into that vision. He was no longer just her protector. He was now her ally, her partner in this dangerous mission. The two of them had traveled across Zenthar, visiting various factions in an attempt to gather support for Lyra's cause. But it wasn't easy. Many of the factions were hesitant to join, fearful of the Queen's wrath. Lyra's mother, Queen Verena, was a powerful ruler, and defying her could mean certain death. Yet Lyra remained resolute. She wasn't backing down. She refused to be a pawn in her mother's game anymore. Harper had been by her side every step of the way. He had watched as she grew into a leader, someone who could inspire others with nothing more than her words. Lyra wasn't just a princess, she was a force to be reckoned with. And as Harper spent more time with her, he began to see the depth of her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been oppressed by the Queen's rule. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, Lyra sat alone in the small room they had rented in a nearby city. The candlelight flickered softly, casting shadows on the walls. Harper walked in, quietly closing the door behind him. He had learned by now that Lyra didn't like to be disturbed when she was thinking, but tonight was different. Tonight she seemed troubled. "Your Highness," Harper said, his voice gentle. Lyra looked up at him, her expression weary. "You can call me Lyra, Captain. We've been through enough together for you to drop the formalities." Harper nodded, though he wasn't sure how to approach her. He had always been a soldier trained to follow orders, but with Lyra it was different. She was no longer just a princess in need of protection. She was someone he respected, someone who had shown him a side of leadership he had never seen before. "What's on your mind?" Harper asked, sitting down beside her. Lyra stared at the candle for a moment, as if the flickering flame held the answers she sought. "I've been thinking about my mother," she said quietly. "I've spent my whole life believing that she was doing what was best for the people, but now I see it all differently." Harper remained silent, waiting for her to continue. He had always known that there was tension between Lyra and her mother, but he had never understood the full extent of it. He had seen the way Lyra spoke about her mother, respectfully, but with a hint of distance. But tonight, her words were different. "She's been lying to me," Lyra said, her voice thick with emotion. "She's been using me as a pawn in her games. All these years I thought she wanted peace, but she's only wanted control. She's been manipulating everyone around her to maintain her power." Harper felt a pang of sympathy for the princess. He had seen firsthand how cruel power could be. But he had never imagined that the Queen, a woman who had seemed so composed and regal, would be capable of such treachery. "I didn't want to believe it," Lyra continued, her eyes now meeting his. "But the evidence is there, the factions who have been attacking me. They're not just enemies, they're allies of my mother. They've been working together all along to suppress the truth." Harper could see the pain in her eyes. This wasn't just about politics for Lyra, it was personal. She had been betrayed by the one person she had trusted above all else. "You don't have to do this alone," Harper said, his voice steady. "We're in this together, Lyra. You don't have to carry the burden by yourself." For a moment there was a flicker of doubt in Lyra's eyes, but it quickly faded. She nodded, her expression firming once again. "I know, and I won't. We have to stop my mother before it's too late." The next few days were filled with preparations. Lyra and Harper met with several leaders of the remaining factions, each one more reluctant than the last. They had no love for the Queen, but they were hesitant to trust Lyra. She was, after all, still her mother's daughter. How could they be sure that she wasn't just another puppet, working to continue the Queen's rule under a different name? Harper could see the strain this was putting on Lyra. The rejection, the suspicion, it was wearing her down. But she refused to give up. She knew that if they didn't act soon, the war would escalate beyond control. The Queen's forces were already gathering, preparing for an all-out assault on the planet. If they didn't stop her now, it would be too late. One evening, after a particularly difficult meeting, Lyra collapsed onto the bed in their temporary quarters, her eyes closed in exhaustion. Harper stood at the window, watching the sunset. The colors of the sky seemed to mirror the turmoil that had been brewing on the planet. He knew that they were running out of time. The Queen was growing desperate, and that meant the threat to Lyra's life was greater than ever. "Harper?" Lyra's voice was soft, but there was a sense of urgency in it. He turned to face her. "Yes, Your Highness." "I need you to promise me something," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Harper walked over to her, his heart heavy with the weight of the moment. "What is it?" "That no matter what happens," she began, "no matter what you hear or see, you won't leave me. Promise me that you'll stay by my side." Harper felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't just about duty anymore. This wasn't about protecting a royal. This was about standing beside someone he believed in, someone who had the strength to change the galaxy. He wasn't just her protector anymore. He was part of her cause, part of her fight. "I promise," he said, his voice firm. "I'll stay with you, Lyra. We're in this together." And with that promise, the path ahead of them became clearer. They weren't just fighting for peace anymore. They were fighting for the future. A future where Lyra could lead, not as a puppet of her mother, but as a leader in her own right. The next day, they received word that the Queen's forces had been mobilized. They were marching toward the capital, preparing to crush any resistance. Lyra knew that the time for negotiation had passed. There was no more room for doubt. They had to act now. Harper and Lyra gathered their allies, the factions that had agreed to stand with them. The final battle was approaching. It was a fight for everything they had worked for the future of Zenthar, and for Lyra's freedom from the Queen's control. As they prepared for the battle ahead, Harper couldn't help but think about how much had changed. He had started this journey as a protector, a soldier following orders, but now he was something more. He was a part of something greater than himself, and he would fight until the very end to ensure that Lyra's vision for a better future became a reality. Captain John Harper stood at the edge of the battlefield, looking at the horizon. The tension in the air was thick, and the ground beneath his boots felt heavy with the weight of the impending conflict. The Queen's forces were closing in, and the battle for Zenthar was about to begin. He had never imagined that his mission would lead him here, to this moment where everything he had fought for would be tested. Beside him stood Princess Lyra. She was no longer just the frightened royal who had needed his protection. She had grown into a leader, someone who was ready to face her mother's forces head-on. There was no turning back now. Lyra had made her decision. She was no longer willing to be controlled by her mother. She was going to fight for her people, for her freedom, and for a future where the truth could be revealed. "Harper," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with a sense of urgency. "Are you ready for this?" Harper turned to her, his face set in determination. "I've never been more ready. You've got this, Lyra, and so do we." She nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was a doubt that Harper understood all too well. This wasn't just about fighting soldiers. It was about fighting a system that had been in place for years, about tearing down a dynasty built on lies and manipulation. It wasn't going to be easy, but Lyra was prepared to do whatever it took. The battlefield stretched out before them, a mix of ancient ruins and newly constructed military fortifications. The Queen's forces were well-equipped, heavily armed, and prepared to crush any opposition. But Lyra had managed to rally a diverse group of allies, factions that had once been neutral or even hostile to her cause. They had come together under one banner, the fight for truth and justice. It was a fragile alliance, one that could fall apart at any moment, but it was their only hope. Harper had seen the commitment in the eyes of the soldiers who stood with them. They weren't fighting for riches or power, they were fighting for something more. They were fighting for a future where the people of Zenthar could live in peace, free from the Queen's iron grip. As the sun began to set, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield, Harper and Lyra made their way to the command center. There, the leaders of their allied factions were already gathered, preparing for the final push against the Queen's forces. The tension in the room was palpable as Lyra addressed the group, her voice calm but filled with authority. "This is it," she said, looking each leader in the eye. "We've come too far to turn back now. We fight not just for our own freedom, but for the future of Zenthar, for the future of the galaxy." The room fell silent, and then one by one the leaders spoke, offering their support. Harper could see the conviction in their faces. They were willing to follow Lyra into battle, no matter the cost. When the meeting was over, Lyra turned to Harper, her expression thoughtful. "I never thought it would come to this. I thought I could fix things from within, but now I see that I was wrong." Harper placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the best you could, and now you're doing what's necessary. The future isn't going to change itself. You've already made a difference, Lyra. You've shown people that they don't have to live in fear." She gave him a small smile, but there was sadness in her eyes. "I hope that's true, I really do. But even if we win this battle, there's still so much to fix, so much to rebuild." "You'll do it," Harper said, his voice firm. "You're not in this alone. We'll rebuild together." The words hung in the air between them, a promise for the future. But the reality of what lay ahead was impossible to ignore. The battle was about to begin, and they would need every ounce of strength to see it through. That night, as the sounds of war grew louder on the horizon, Lyra couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what the next day would bring. Harper had promised her that they would fight together, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was dragging him into a fight that he had never asked for. She had never wanted this burden. She had never wanted to become a leader, to have to make these impossible decisions. But here she was, standing at the forefront of a revolution, and there was no turning back. She heard a soft knock on the door, and Harper stepped inside, his expression serious. "Can't sleep," Lyra shook her head. "I keep thinking about what happens next. If we win, then what? How do we rebuild from the ashes?" Harper sat down beside her. "One step at a time. The first step is winning this battle. After that, we deal with what comes next." She nodded, grateful for his calm reassurance. But deep down, she knew that rebuilding would be the hardest part. They couldn't just destroy the old system. They had to create something better in its place. It would take time, patience, and above all, unity. And right now, the future of Zenthar was uncertain. There were still those who would fight to keep the old ways alive, those who would resist change until the very end. But for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a glimmer of hope. She had never been this close to her dream of a peaceful, free planet. She had never been this close to the truth. It was within her reach, and no matter what happened, she would fight to make it a reality. The next morning, the battle began. Harper and Lyra stood together at the front lines, watching as their forces clashed with the Queen's soldiers. The noise of battle filled the air, shouts of command, the roar of gunfire, the clash of metal on metal. The earth beneath them shook with the force of explosions. It was chaos, pure and simple, but there was something else in the air too, a sense of unity, a feeling that they were fighting for something worth fighting for. Harper moved swiftly, leading the charge with Lyra at his side. She wasn't just watching from the sidelines anymore. She was in the thick of it, fighting alongside her people, her presence inspiring those around her. They had come to support her, to believe in her cause, and she wasn't about to let them down. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Queen's forces were beginning to falter. The Queen's soldiers, once so sure of their victory, were now retreating. It wasn't over yet, but it felt like they were on the verge of something great. They had broken the Queen's hold on Zenthar, and now they were taking back their planet. Lyra looked to Harper, her face grim but determined. "We're winning, but we can't stop now, not until it's over." Harper nodded. "We'll finish this, Lyra, together." And with that, they charged forward, determined to see their fight through to the end. They had come this far, and they wouldn't stop until the Queen's reign was over, until Zenthar was free. The sun had barely risen when the last of the Queen's forces retreated from the battlefield. The earth was scarred, the air thick with smoke, but the sound of battle had finally died down. Lyra stood amidst the wreckage, her breath steady despite the chaos that surrounded her. She had always known that the path to freedom would be hard, but she hadn't realized just how much it would cost. Captain Harper stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. The fight was over, but the work was far from done. The battlefield was littered with the remains of soldiers, some from Lyra's army, many from the Queen's. The bloodshed was a painful reminder of the cost of the victory they had just earned. Lyra turned to Harper, her voice low but filled with resolve. "We did it." Harper nodded but didn't speak right away. There was something in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of what had happened, of the lives lost. "We did," he said finally, his voice rough from the battle. "But this is just the beginning, Lyra. The real work starts now." She looked at him, a mix of gratitude and determination in her eyes. She knew what he meant. Winning the battle had been only the first step. Now they had to rebuild. The galaxy had been fractured by years of war, and the Queen's reign had left deep scars. But it wasn't just about putting the pieces back together. It was about creating something new, something better. The two of them walked through the wreckage, stepping over the debris, knowing that every step forward would be a challenge. They could already hear the sounds of their allies moving through the city, gathering the wounded and securing the area. Lyra's people had won their freedom, but that didn't mean the road ahead would be easy. "Where do we start?" Lyra asked, her voice quiet but steady. She looked to Harper for guidance, though she knew the answer already. She had made her decision long ago. She had to lead, and he would stand by her side. Harper glanced at her, seeing the weight of the world in her eyes. "We start by making sure no one else suffers. We start by showing the galaxy that there's a way forward. We fight for the future." They spent the next few hours organizing the survivors, helping those who had been injured during the battle. There were no grand speeches, no celebrations. There was only work to be done. Lyra didn't want to wait. She knew that the moment of victory would pass, and with it would come the harsh reality of rebuilding what had been broken. As night fell, they gathered in what remained of the royal palace, now a place of refuge rather than power. Lyra stood in front of the leaders of the factions that had come to her side. Many of them were wounded, their faces weary from the battle. But there was a sense of unity in the room, a shared understanding that together they had achieved something remarkable. "This is not the end," Lyra began, her voice strong and clear. "This is the beginning. We fought for freedom, and now we will fight for peace. We will work together to rebuild Zenthar, to rebuild the trust that has been broken. We will make sure that no one is ever forced to live in fear again." Her words echoed in the room, and Harper could see the hope in the eyes of those who listened. It was the first step toward something new. But as Lyra spoke, Harper couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The battle was over, yes, but the true struggle had just begun. After the meeting, Lyra and Harper stood outside on the balcony, looking out over the city. The stars were visible in the night sky, a reminder of the vastness of the galaxy. Lyra had a long road ahead of her, and Harper knew that his role in this new chapter of her life was far from over. "Do you think we can really do it?" Lyra asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. Harper glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "I think you've already done it, Lyra. You've brought people together. You've shown them that there's a better way. It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is." Lyra smiled at him, the weight on her shoulders momentarily lifting. "I couldn't have done it without you, Harper. You've been there every step of the way. You've kept me grounded when I wanted to give up." Harper smiled back, his eyes meeting hers. "You don't give up, Lyra. You never have. That's why you'll lead this planet into a new era." They stood there for a long moment, simply looking out at the city they had fought for. The battle was over, but the war for Zenthar's future was far from won. Lyra knew that there would be those who still opposed her, those who would try to tear down everything she had worked for. But she also knew that she wasn't alone. She had allies, and she had people who believed in her. Together, they would rebuild. The next few days were a blur of activity. Lyra worked tirelessly, meeting with the leaders of the various factions and beginning the long process of establishing a new government. Harper remained by her side, helping with the military efforts and ensuring that the remnants of the Queen's loyalists were dealt with swiftly and efficiently. The transition was difficult, but it was necessary. As the weeks passed, Lyra began to see the fruits of their labor. People started to return to their homes, and trade routes began to open up again. The wounds of war were still fresh, but there was a sense of hope in the air that hadn't existed before. Lyra's vision for a free and peaceful Zenthar was becoming a reality. But the work was far from finished. There were still challenges to face, still divisions to heal. And while Lyra had managed to win the war, she knew that it was the peace that would be the true test of her leadership. She would need to work tirelessly to ensure that the unity they had fought for was not lost. Harper remained her steadfast protector, even though his role had shifted. He was no longer just the soldier assigned to keep her safe. He was her closest ally, someone she could rely on as they built the future together. They were partners now, and their bond had only deepened in the aftermath of the battle. One evening, as they walked through the city, Lyra turned to Harper. "What's next for you?" she asked, her voice curious. Harper looked at her, his face thoughtful. "I'll stay here. I've got nowhere else to go." Lyra smiled softly, her gaze meeting his. "Good. I need you here, Harper. We're in this together, all the way." They walked side by side, knowing that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be obstacles, challenges, and moments when it would feel like everything was falling apart. But they also knew that they were no longer fighting alone. They had each other, and together they would rebuild the future of Zenthar. And as the night settled in, the stars shining above them, Lyra felt a sense of peace. The fight was over. The hard part was behind them. Now they could focus on creating something better, something lasting. A world where freedom, hope, and unity could flourish. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they would face it together.